Since the world was born in the beginning of chaos, the heavenly Tao has emerged, governing the laws of heaven and earth and changing all things. Under the rule of the heavenly Tao, the world went through two great cycles. During the first great cycle, thousands of people trained diligently, and they practiced cultivation to reach the realm beyond the heavenly Tao. However, people were too greedy. They not only selfishly stole the spiritual roots of heaven and earth, they even arrogantly tried to claim that they were representatives of the heavenly Tao. From this, the heavens were awakened by the greed of the world and became disillusioned with all things, and as a result, the heavens destroyed all beings. During the second great cycle, a division occurred, a beautiful, sublime heavenly world, a simple but in turn extraordinary world, human, and the earthly three worlds were divided into regions and were no longer one and the same. The West was under the control of the gods, and the East was ruled by immortals. The earthly world was deserted, and quickly it turned into a wasteland. The pile of bones reached the height of mountains, and the souls of criminals turned into ghosts. The human world lies somewhere between the powerful realm of heaven and the realm of earth, where the weak fall into the cycle of reincarnation. However, the strongest representatives of the first great cycle were not completely destroyed. Some of them were reborn as humans and remain in hiding to this day, while others were brought back to life by the dead and also hid somewhere. But they all have the same goal: to enter the path of destiny and challenge the heavenly Tao. Having awakened, the heavenly Tao became very angry and unleashed a mighty thunder. The second time, the planet itself was destroyed. And now the world has entered the third great cycle, and it has already been several tens of thousands of years since those events. The black-haired guy sitting in front of the sphere asked if he was the new heavenly Tao, to which he immediately received a positive answer. Hearing the answer, he stood up and jumped off the rock he was sitting on. Having landed, a satisfied smile crossed his face. He replied that this was the first time he had been reborn, and the system had awarded him such a high status. She explained that he is the heavenly Tao that the system chose, and that has unlimited power in this world. Now he is himself. At that very moment, their conversation was interrupted by a group of people who were walking straight towards the guy. Those who saw the stranger immediately became tense because there were many bandits in this area. They watched attentively as the black-haired guy engaged in a heated dialogue with someone. The Tao itself explained to the system that strength cannot solve all problems because it can only help against enemies. He added that Brother Shun once said that the strong use force against the stronger and the weak against the weak, but he was not a former heavenly Tao. He would never have made such a base mistake. The old man came to the conclusion that the man in front of him was a fool because he was talking to himself. His thoughts were interrupted by a rather loud roar that came from right behind him. He began to slowly turn his head, hoping that he was imagining it. However, first he heard the screams of his comrades, and then a huge monster appeared behind them. A huge green monster was flying straight towards them, clearly determined to kill them. People started running in different directions, shouting that it was a fourth-ranked dragon, while our main character remained standing in one place. In his mind, the heavenly Tao began to list the ranks. The demigods were the 6th rank, and the true god was the 7th, and there were still quite a few different ranks, considering that the person in front of him was weak. He didn't scare our main character at all. He simply stood there, dripping in his ears. Taking out the dirt from there, he looked at it carefully, and then he launched it towards the flying monster with incredible force. It flashed right past the green dragon's face, causing him to stop. A loud explosion was heard behind the monster, followed by a real earthquake. Turning back, the dragon saw huge holes in the stone mountains. Looking towards the black-haired guy, he saw a terrifying monster. This look scared him very much, causing his whole body to shudder. He immediately began to fly away in the opposite direction, while Tao praised the monster because he was smart. The system tried to make fun of the heavenly Tao because he talked about using force against the weak, but the guy explained to her that he only scared the monster. Shar asked the guy if he really wasn't going to use force against his opponents, to which he explained that negotiations were still possible and the world would not be destroyed for the 3rd time, but he could not promise anything. After all, he had arrived here less than an hour ago and still knew nothing about this world. He didn't know what kind of situation this world was in, but he was going to study everything to become a good heavenly Tao. Having reached some city, he decided that this would be his first stop. The black-haired reincarnated man arrived at the gate of the City of Freedom. At that moment, a cart with fairly good security was approaching. Inside sat girls who were dressed dirty and their body parts were tied with chains. The two guys were discussing their good hunting as they thought they could make a good profit from it. Looking back, one of the guys laughed because fairies were in great demand among the local nobility here. Suddenly, they caught up with our main character, who was carefully watching what was happening. Stopping, one of the guys asked him with a satisfied smile if he needed any slaves by any chance. He saw his interlocutor close his eyes, and it seemed to him that he was deep in thought. So, jumping off the cart, he began to shout that for 10 gold coins he could buy any slave. He explained that these fairies were the newest of those captured, ranging from prisoners of war to innocent girls from the village, and that there were also children there who could be raised. After hearing this story, Heavenly Tao cast his gaze towards the cage. A pleasantly bright glow immediately appeared in his eyes. The black-haired boy saw their hearts, realizing that they were almost dead. I was distracted from my own thoughts by the voice of the slave trader, who added that if this product was not interesting, he had a rarer one. He asked to go further, pointing to the next cell, which was under the screen. Almost immediately, he threw her off the cart with the cage. Both men examined the contents carefully. The black-haired hero's gaze immediately tensed, and he looked closely at the girl, immediately noticing her long ears as well as her bright yellow hair. Along with this, her crippled legs, which were all covered in wounds. The man said that one of the representatives of the elven race, which are found only on the western continent, the guy could get her for 1,000 gold coins. The black-haired Heavenly Tao's gaze looked sad. Without answering the man, he immediately turned around and began to walk away, which surprised the slave trader. Having spat, he called the guy an ordinary poor man. Already in the city itself, the guy thought that human trafficking is worse than a feudal state. The system immediately asked Tao why he hadn't freed the slaves, as that wasn't his style. To which the guy explained that there was no point in this, since the slave traders would just start kidnapping even more, so it wouldn't solve the problem. He waved his hand and asked the system to look there. Having said that there are at least several hundred slaves in this shop, and there are a huge number of such shops, the system explained that he was the Heavenly Tao, and if he wished, all the slaves in the world would be freed. All the slave traders in the world would die, and all the chambers of commerce would go bankrupt. The guy told her that in that case, another chamber would rise up to fill the commercial void and a new hunt would begin. He was going to solve the problem, so they had to deal with the root cause of the problem. Upon entering, he was immediately greeted joyfully by a man, who asked the client if he could find out what the guy was interested in. He explained that all these slaves were already finished products, who had been well trained in their chamber and were guaranteed not to run away. They also added that even if someone runs away, they will compensate tenfold. The man also told the boy that even if he freed them, they would still not escape from him. Tao asked if he could ask them questions, to which he immediately received a positive answer, adding that they also had slaves for VIP clients. Approaching the glass, he carefully examined the woman. He asked her if she wanted freedom, to which she began to shake her head from side to side, indicating a negative answer. Then the guy asked the next question, asking if she had a lover. Immediately after this question, the woman's face changed and became filled with horror. Seeing this expression, Heavenly Tao took another step, getting as close as possible to the glass, and again asking the question whether the girl wants to become a free person or still wants to remain a slave. She, lowering her head with a trembling voice, answered that she simply wanted to be her master's slave. At this very moment, Heavenly Tao let out a heavy sigh. Turning towards the man in the cap, he asked to be taken to the VIP room. And so, sometime later, he was already there. They were pouring hot tea for him, asking him to enjoy it because soon everything will be ready. As he was leaving, the man again asked the guy to wait a minute, and he went to tell someone to provide him with VIP items. With a smile on his face, the black-haired boy wished the man good luck in their business, and so he left, loudly closing the door behind him. The Heavenly Tao itself immediately ordered the system to open. As soon as it opened, he waved his hand, ordering the protocol of rules to be opened, declaring that the abolition of slavery was his first task as a Heavenly Tao. The system asked to describe the rule that Tao wished to add. After thinking for a bit, the guy said that the rule is that everyone below rank 5 and trying to trade in people, they will see a dark silhouette that will begin to seem many times more powerful than the person himself. And when a merchant plans to commit a crime, he will be given a warning. The system said that there were some doubts about this. It did not understand why it was from the 5th rank. To which Dao explained that those above the 5th rank are immortals. He asked whether the system really thought they would trade in people, because in this case they will begin to lose their authority. The heavenly Dao also added that if the warning is left unheeded and the merchant does not change his mind, the silhouette will begin to attack until the person changes his mind or until he dies. The system immediately began the rulemaking process by asking for a definition. After thinking, Dao answered, "An act of coercion, when a creature is put on the market through violence or direct violent threats for the purpose of profit, the exchange of goods, in exchange for limiting the actions of humanoid creatures. However, there was also an exception. This was the voluntary consent of the slave." The system, having developed everything, asked whether Dao wanted to carry out a preliminary preview. Naturally, the boy didn't even think about the answers, immediately clicking on yes. Immediately, some holograms began to appear around him, swirling around the guy. At this time, slaves were being led down a long corridor straight to the VIP box for viewing. Their bodies seemed to be subjected to some kind of force. They experienced a strange feeling. In general, like the whole world, everyone felt some changes. The rules were activated at that very second. The protagonist was distracted from his conversation with the system by a rather loud knock on the door. Literally immediately after the knock, the door began to slowly open, and then silhouettes appeared. The man turned to the gentleman, saying that he had prepared 10 of the best goods especially for him. Casting his gaze to the side, the heavenly Dao carefully examined each slave. These were girls of different figures, hair colors, each of them was a beauty. The black-haired man was again distracted from his own thoughts by the man, who said that although the price for them was high, there would be a discount especially for him. And at that very second, right behind the man, some dark silhouette began to appear. Feeling a strange sensation, the man immediately looked straight back. Seeing his own reflection, however, his appearance was quite frightening. He immediately screamed at the top of his voice because he was quite scared. Falling to the ground, he began to move back while the other girls screamed in fear. After pointing his finger, the man turned to the main character, asking if he had seen it too. The heavenly Dao himself did not immediately respond, smiling, and looked at the creature that had appeared for a few more seconds. And then, with the same smile on his face, he answered, "Of course," asking if this was part of a meeting of respected clients. But he continued to shout fearfully, adding, "Of course it's not like that." Lost in thought, the black-haired guy said that the coup had already begun then. And then again, as calmly and slowly as possible, he reached for the cup of tea. Standing up, he slowly approached the man sitting on the ground, who at that very second, shouting, asked the gentleman what he was doing because this creature was dangerous. But Dao said that if he was not here, he would not be in the best position. Naturally, he did not understand what the main character meant until he looked in the direction where Dao was pointing. And as soon as the guy turned his gaze to the crack in the wall, a huge man fell out of it. This frightened those around even more. Everyone was screaming and running in different directions. At that moment, our main character caught the flying man, continuing to drink tea. He barely opened his eyes and looked forward. He looked scared. The slave trader himself was in shock because he recognized this man. It was Captain Andre. Having let the man go, the heavenly Dao asked who this man with a sword in his hands was. To which the worker replied in a trembling voice that it was one of the captains of the security service of their Chamber of Commerce, a strong warrior of the 2nd rank, thinking to himself that he was simply facing a monster. Captain Andre himself at this time did not understand how this had happened at all because he was the strongest. Eyes appeared right from behind the wall in the darkness. Andre thought to himself that this creature looked like him, but its strength was several times greater than his. And then, a rather loud step was heard, stepping over the broken wall, and behind him appeared the dark silhouette of a captain with a sword in his hands. Andre asked the man in the black cap if he could see him too, to which the man could not answer because he was in shock. Gritting his teeth, the man turned to Dao, saying that the client should leave the place, since the captain could not guarantee his safety, to which the black-haired man, with a satisfied smile on his face, replied that he shouldn't worry, because in this world, no one could kill him. Standing up, Andre activated his power. It immediately covered his body and weapon. The man angrily shouted that he would not leave this all so easily. The dark silhouette standing opposite also activated some kind of power. They rushed towards each other, preparing to deliver a powerful blow. Literally a moment later, their blows touched, and a rather loud ringing sound was heard. The real Captain Andre screamed from anger, and also from the fact that the enemy's blows were too heavy. Their movements were incredibly fast, and neither of them lost. From this speed of attacks, a rather powerful stream of wind arose inside the room, which almost blew away the slaves. The main character, having finished his tea, slowly put the cup on the table. He reached out his hand, thinking that it was probably here. The real captain's sword developed a fairly large crack. Noticing this, the dark silhouette sped up, throwing his huge weapon behind his back. And then, just as quickly, he began to move his dark sword towards the enemy. Although the real Captain Andre tried to block the attack, his sword did not withstand it, sending the man spitting blood, flying straight towards the heavenly Tao. Already lying on the ground, he looked towards his dark double, not understanding how this was even possible. His body began to tremble. He was afraid of his own reflection that was looking back at him. The man jumped up and began to protect his face, asking his double not to approach him. He closed his eyes and waited for the blow his opponent would deliver. Opening his eyes, Captain Andre was quite surprised. After all, the dark silhouette began to move away without finishing him off. At the same time, the slaves were chained against the wall. They were too frightened. Approaching the girls, the dark double of the captain swung, knocking his sword over his head, and then striking a fairly powerful blow right at the place where the slaves were. They continued to scream throughout the room, making squeals as the man continued to strike. The chains on their hands began to split as the man hit them. He struck several blows at once to break everyone's chains. They continued to scream in turn with their eyes closed, because they thought that he was going to kill them. But as soon as they opened their eyes, they were surprised, because their hands were free. Captain Andre, watching this, did not understand what was happening right now. And then the heavenly Tao shouted loudly, striking his hand, that he understood everything. Explaining to the fighter that this dark silhouette did not intend to kill him, he only wanted to save the slaves. Loud shouts were heard for people to hurry, because all these monsters needed to be stopped. Hearing these screams, the dark-haired guy's face looked satisfied. The man standing on the second floor pointed his finger down, shouting for his opponents not to retreat. Seeing the slaves running away, anger flashed across his face, because his goods were running away right before his eyes. He angrily shouted at his subordinates to immediately return the goods. At the same moment, a dark double began to appear behind him. Feeling a rather unusual sensation, the man immediately began to look back. But as soon as he turned around, he received a powerful blow to his face, falling from the second floor. Under his own weight, he broke through the floor and began coughing up blood. Right in front of him stood a yellow-haired girl with long ears, which immediately began to move to the side, away from the lying man. Looking at the flying away girl, the man trembled, because right before his eyes the money was flying away. Our main character approached the same man and examined him carefully. The yellow-haired girl felt eyes on her, stopping and looking back. Seeing the same guy she had already met, he looked in her direction with a kind face. As kindly as possible, he told her to come home as soon as possible. She, with tears in her eyes, happily replied that she was already flying away. Watching everything that was happening, the main character was happy, because he made his first move. Suddenly, he noticed something. Turning around and saying that she was moving quickly. He noticed a girl in a greenish robe rush past him. She looked carefully at the guy, examining him from head to toe. And then, kneeling down, she said loudly that she had finally found her master. This girl's name was Qing Tian. And so, sometime later, the main character was already in the tea room. Taking the hot tea, Heavenly Tao began to drink it, after telling Qing Tian that he said not to follow him. But she insisted. Because she had sworn to follow her master everywhere, she asked to be allowed to walk side by side with him. The heavenly Tao listened to all this attentively, silently. After thinking for a bit, he turned away and refused the girl's offer. She lowered her head and began to mutter something angrily to herself. But a moment later, with tears in her eyes, she began to ask why. Falling on her knees at the boy's feet, she begged him not to abandon her, because she would be a devoted subordinate. She didn't understand what was wrong with her, having promised to become whatever her master wanted. Standing up, the protagonist explained that he was not leaving her, adding that she had become too attached to him. And then he pointed his finger at her, thereby shutting her up and ordering her to stand up. He added that she has absolutely no control over herself, because if someone starts bothering her, she will simply destroy everything around her. She, no longer with tears in her eyes, began to speak shyly about how she wanted to be with the master. Exhaling heavily, the heavenly Tao thought for a moment. asking if she really wanted to be with him that much. The girl immediately rushed to hug the guy, while he angrily screamed for her to stop touching him. Pushing the blonde away, the Heavenly Tao also added that he was afraid, because if she stayed with him, she would one day attack him in the dark night in the room. The system immediately joined the dialogue, saying that this was not so, because Qing Tian did not have the guts. This was the most she was capable of. Having listened to the system, he agreed, telling the girl to behave quietly and not to kneel, since this would only attract unnecessary attention. She, looking at the black-haired man, nodded, thinking that the master had not driven her away, which meant that there was a place for her in his heart. Already talking with the system, Dao said that he wanted to end slavery, but now he had acquired a personal slave. The system, laughing, compared the girl to a dog. Lost in thought, the black-haired man also added that he remembered that the previous Dao had 5 incarnations, asking if there was anything similar here, to which the system responded that Dao was sure that not all incarnations were girls, since among the 5 incarnations of heaven, only 2 were girls. Those who were loyal to the heavenly Tao, upon hearing this, the guy exhaled heavily. After thinking for a moment, he snapped his finger and addressed Qing Tian. She humbly, lowering her gaze, embarrassedly replied that her subordinate was here. The black-haired guy asked her what she thought about the rebels. At that very moment, the girl's gaze, as well as her aura, changed, and she spoke harshly about how all those who oppose heaven are toad-like and rude people, and that they only killed each other out of greed. The heavenly Tao agreed with this. The girl added that this is precisely why everyone should be destroyed. With a gloomy face, she also said that the gods are dead, the demons are destroyed, the centuries constantly replace each other, and the sky always remains eternal. With folded hands, she bowed to the heavenly Tao, saying that her Lord was the eternal ruler of the 3 worlds. Exhaling heavily, the boy replied that it was not a fact, because despite the fact that the heavenly Tao is invincible, it is not yet certain that something more powerful than it cannot appear. He stood up and started to leave, saying that time was running out and that they had to go. Naturally, the girl did not contradict her master, immediately getting up and following him to the exit. Having already left the tea house, the heavenly Tao called the system, watching as the new rule began to be implemented around the world. He was interrupted from his own thoughts by a girl who had a question. She said that it was obvious that he could grant everyone untold wealth and get rid of the oppression of this or that race, so she did not understand what these dark silhouettes were for. She immediately received a blow to the head. The guy called her stupid, because in this case, everyone will return to primitive society. He explained that the purpose of the existence of the heavenly Tao is to maintain a certain order and balance, or actions are aimed at eliminating imbalance, but not in order to make everyone feel good. The duty of the heavenly Tao is to open up new paths of development for humanity. He is capable of what others can do, but he has the courage to do what others cannot. Also adding that if there is black in the world, then there must also be white, and vice versa. Having asked if his companion understood, she immediately nodded with a stupid smile on her face. Walking through the city, the protagonist's gaze was caught by one situation. One of the girls was throwing coins to a man sitting on the ground. With a smile on his face, Heavenly Tao told Qing Tian that this was a living example. The black-haired man also snapped his finger, telling his companion that it would be safer this way, so he hid her. The man sitting on the ground, who had been given money, grabbed the girl's hand and began to thank her with tears in his eyes, while another man grabbed a bag of money from right behind his back. Seeing this, Dao decided to intervene, shouting at the girl to watch her purse more carefully while she was giving out alms. She immediately turned her gaze back, frightening the thief with just her gaze, immediately raising his leg in order to launch an attack. Because the girl was much faster, she was able to deliver a powerful blow directly to the thief's stomach. By sending him straight into the sky, even the heavenly Tao appreciated this blow. Lowering her head, the dark-haired girl began to carefully examine the guy. And then, smiling, she folded her hands, thanking the guy. Coming closer, she introduced herself. Her name was Ai. In response, our protagonist introduced himself as Heavenly Tao. She began to thank the guy again, because otherwise, she would have been in big trouble if he had not warned her. The black-haired guy himself asked not to thank him because he just wanted to help. As she left, she thanked the guy again, saying that she still had things to do. But the protagonist stopped her, assuming that she was an adventurer, asking if she would mind fulfilling his request. He thought to himself that if he wanted to learn as much as possible about this world, he needed to talk to adventurers. Taking a look at his companion, he also thought that this dog was very good, but he couldn't just show her off. That's why he immediately threw her a huge bag of money. He said that he was going to the Western continent and that he would be bored on the road, so he asked to keep him company. She, smelling the money, beamed, shouting that the gentleman was generous, and she agreed. Qing Tian intervened in their conversation, asking if she could chat with the gentleman, but he said that he would let her out as soon as the time came. And so, sometime later, the Trinity was already waiting for the main character. They had prepared everything to set off on a long journey. As soon as the heavenly Tao approached, the dark-haired girl immediately apologized because the preparations took too much time. And then, leaning towards the guy's ear, she also added that they should not attract attention, so this carriage would be the most suitable. After starting to introduce her friends with whom she is traveling, the man's name was Ahai. He was of mid-level. The nun was an early-stage nun named Mary. Looking at them, the guy greeted them, thinking that the Taoist and the nun in the same squad was a strange combination. His thoughts were interrupted by Aya's cry, who shouted that they were leaving. And so, sometime later, the carriage left the city. Inside, 3 people were sitting, heatedly discussing something. The entire conversation was interrupted by the heavenly Tao, who asked Mary if she was from the Holy Throne of Light, to which he immediately received a positive answer. The girl also added that God would bless the gentleman. Hearing these words, the black-haired boy actually thought deeply. Looking at her cross, he thought that the gods of light had no chance against the heavenly Tao. Seeing the guy's gaze, the red-haired girl became embarrassed because the guy was looking straight at her chest. Realizing what was going on, the boy immediately looked away, apologizing. Looking at Qing Tian, who was quite angry about this, he thought that it was she who killed the first god of light. The system entered his thoughts, saying that most likely the girl did not remember this, since she killed a huge number of people in the first great cycle. Ahai joined their conversation, saying that few people nowadays spend money on simple communication, hinting that the guy was strong. But the heavenly Tao replied that their commander would not be stronger than him. She immediately looked out at the guy, saying that Lord Heavenly Tao was very strong, so he did not need any protection. With a gloomy face, the man replied, "That's it," also adding that he could barely sense the master's aura, so it was difficult to even tell whether he was sitting here. Hearing these words, the black-haired guy smiled. A thin thread of his dark aura began to emerge from his body, which evaporated further and further, higher and higher into the sky, extending right to the terrifying underworld, straight to the dark-haired girl who, having sensed the aura, began to move. She recognized it immediately, for it was the aura of her master. To himself, the heavenly Tao thought that he had been discovered, considering his own actions to be careless. His thoughts were interrupted by a girl's scream. She was shouting at him to look ahead. The cart was moving straight towards a group of people who were looking attentively towards our heroes. The man asked the nun who all these people were, but she assumed they were refugees. Observing the nun, the black-haired protagonist assumed that they were slaves from the free city who were saved thanks to the dark silhouettes. The girls thought that they had acted recklessly because it was too dangerous outside the city. The man also supported their conversation, afraid to even guess how many people died from the dark silhouettes. Sitting back, the red-haired woman folded her hands and added that the dark silhouette's methods were too radical. But the girl commander intervened, shouting that she had long wanted to crush the heads of all the slave traders. Their arguments were interrupted by our protagonist, who also joined in their discussions, asking whether the dark silhouettes were right or not. The girls immediately fell silent. An awkward silence ensued, when suddenly a scream was heard. The man driving the horses shouted that everything was right, if you think about it. Compared to their long suffering, this is not so bad. After all, they lost the castle, but they gained freedom both now and in the future. The dark-haired woman also joined in these words, because former slaves now choose their own path. The red-haired woman, in turn, said that, unfortunately, those who have already been sold have a hard time. Folding her hands, she began to pray, asking the God of Light to save their souls. Seeing these prayers, Tao asked what the meaning of the prayers was, but she did not understand the meaning of the questions. To which Tao again replied that the God of Light could not save so many people. But she immediately began to angrily shout that the God of Light was a merciful goddess who would sooner or later help everyone in need. But Tao did not think so, so he again said that he would not help. The commander intervened in their argument, asking her friends to calm down. Looking away, looking at his companion, the heavenly Tao thought that he was telling the truth because the goddess really would not help. The man in dark green also joined the conversation, saying that their master had gone a bit overboard. Even so, the black-haired boys still didn't understand the meaning of their faith. The commander said that in this case it was better to pray for others than for themselves, because they themselves did not rely on the gods. They had to fight with their own strength. Hearing all this talk, the nun began to shout again, asking why then the people on the eastern continent still sacrificed people for the sake of rain. Naturally, upon learning of this, the heavenly Tao was quite surprised. Turning to the Taoist, he asked if they really didn't have a spell to make it rain, to which the man replied that the gentleman was apparently joking, since an ordinary person of the 5th rank would not be able to do this. Naturally, upon hearing these words, the protagonist was very surprised and began to talk about how a 3rd-rank Taoist could create ice talismans. By launching them towards the clouds, he moistens the clouds and speeds up the rainfall. Upon hearing this, the man was very surprised. Listening to this dialogue, the dark-haired girl began to tremble, trying to restrain herself. But she couldn't. She laughed loudly. She didn't understand. Because it couldn't rain if the clouds were frozen, the nun agreed with her. Qingtian tried to intervene as they dared to mock Dao, but he stopped her. The guy's hand landed right on the girl's chest, causing her to immediately calm down and become embarrassed. Seeing such a reaction, Heavenly Tao was surprised because the girl quickly calmed down. But looking in her direction, he understood everything. She was excited. Instead of eyes, she had huge red hearts, and drool began to flow from her mouth. Dao immediately activated the system, realizing what he had to do. One of his main points, he added, was that he had to protect himself from this crazy woman. And so, sometime later, our heroes decided to make a stop. The Taoist, using magic and casting a spell, began to make a fire. He succeeded with the method of several repetitions. He explained to the gentleman that it was dangerous to walk at night, so it was better to rest. The 3 of them were going to keep watch while the gentleman slept peacefully. Dao himself was studying the system at that moment, saying that there were 3 combat-grade monsters nearby. In addition to that, there were several low-level ones. Assuming the team won't be hard to destroy, Qingtian approached the master and said that there was a group of monsters in the southwest, and she asked what she should do with them. "Going to bed?" the main character replied. "Nothing." And then he turned away, adding that she needed to stand next to him while he slept. She looked at the main character with a calm face without moving, but gradually her face began to change to a lustful one. Her thoughts were clearly not about just looking. Then some wooden sign hit her in the face. Taking it in her hands, she did not understand what it was and began to examine it carefully. It was written on it in large letters, "No night approaches." The girl immediately fell to her knees and began to sob. She had other plans for that night. At the same time, the dark-haired woman told the Taoist that she was pregnant. Upon hearing this, the man was delighted and promised that as soon as they returned, they would immediately get engaged. Because of these conversations, Heavenly Tao couldn't sleep, thinking that these 2 had already gotten on his nerves. While hugging, the Taoist became distracted. His face changed abruptly. He could not look away. His face gradually began to sink into horror. He couldn't believe his eyes. Having let go of the girl, he immediately rushed towards the cave, starting to shout for everyone to wake up immediately. Directly below them, in the distance in the forest, some creature with huge wings appeared. The more the dark-haired traveler looked, the more horrified her expression became. In the distance, the girl saw a skeleton that was emitting a terrifying aura. Literally a second later, a whole squad of undead appeared, approaching the resting place of our heroes. Standing up, yawning, the heavenly Tao was surprised because there were too many undead. Tao was also surprised because the world does not have basic functions such as 6 reincarnations. But the system said that there was such a thing. There was a breakdown. Grabbing a nearby flying ball, the black-haired boy did not understand what the problem was and asked for an explanation. And she explained that at the beginning of the first great cycle, the predecessor of the heavenly Tao created reincarnation in order to somehow balance yin and yang, using part of his powers in the process. Exhaling heavily, Tao did not understand why all this could not be done normally. And the system responded that, in fact, everything worked out in the beginning, and the first world wall was erected to balance everything. But the influx of mixed energy led to countless casualties. This time, the protagonist now understood why his predecessor did this. At that moment, the undead themselves were talking to people. The dark-haired commander was even more horrified because skeletons can talk. The red-haired nun ran up and apologized to the black-haired guy. She apologized for the fact that they might die today. After all, necromancers and third-rank death knights, as well as such a huge number of undead soldiers, are terrifying. The Taoist also said that they would die unless the Lord of Heavenly Tao proved stronger than them. The red-haired girl dropped her huge cross from her hands. Falling to her knees, she began to scream that God exists, asking him to save them. Turning towards the trembling girl, Tao said that he didn't like such people. At that moment, the Taoist did not understand why the black-haired man was so calm. After another short pause, the protagonist loudly asked the undead why they had come to see him. They, in turn, were quite surprised by such action on the part of the person. Hearing no answer, a smile appeared on the face of the heavenly Tao. Releasing his power, which seemed to eclipse the entire area, he loudly asked if they were really going to fight him. The guy's entire body was covered in a blue aura, which began to rise at incredible speed straight into the sky. Sometime later, the protagonist asked again if they were sure they were going to fight him. At that very moment, the skeleton commander appeared, riding on a horse. Each skeleton felt this incredible power. Their bodies began to tremble involuntarily. At some point, without even realizing it, they began to scream in fear. With a smile on his face, our hero called them names while Qing Tian, standing nearby, asked if she could deal with them. A huge sword rose up and delivered several attacks. The attacks went straight through the skeletons in front, which were cut down in an instant. The girl standing next to our hero was surprised by these actions. After all, it was the commander of this horde who did this himself, attacking his own comrades. Seeing these actions, the main character smiled. He began to applaud and called it a smart move, considering it different from others. The system said, to be more precise, it was not murder, because they had already been dead for a long time. At that moment, the undead itself began to make some strange sounds. She screamed loudly that the weak could be killed. And at that very moment, all the skeletons began to scream in one voice. They rushed towards our protagonist's comrades, while they froze in one place. Having come to their senses, they immediately entered into battle, starting to use their powers. Watching this, the main character did not move. Suddenly, his face changed dramatically, saying that he had hired them just to talk to him. Raising his leg, he loudly declared, "Before they complete their task, no one can harm them, because they are all under his protection." After these words, he stepped onto the ground, and immediately a bright light appeared under his foot. And after it, huge cracks appeared which began to spread in different directions, to such an extent that they even disappeared from the sight of the average person. The earth began to move apart in different directions, and skeletons began to fall right into the rift. There was quite a loud noise, the screams of skeletons. With each passing moment, the gap became wider and wider, and eventually all the skeletons began to fall. The undead commander couldn't believe this incredible power. Each of the team members thought that Lord Heavenly Tao was very, very strong. The system immediately asked Tao. He said that there was no point in threatening others, to which the protagonist replied that force could not solve the problem, but the enemy could be dealt with. Looking into the distance, he shouted loudly not to hide. As soon as the dust settled, a girl appeared who could barely stand on her feet. The girl stood up and bowed, introducing herself as a necromancer. With a trembling voice, she said that she wanted to express her apologies for disrupting their journey. Hearing this, Heavenly Tao thought that the girl was quite polite. Approaching her, Tao said that he was not such a cruel man. No one owned this land, so anyone could be here. The girl thanked the guy for his understanding, bowing her head again. And then, looking at her army, she immediately ordered them to bow as well. All the skeletons immediately fell to their knees before our main hero. Our protagonist's comrades began to slowly walk through the huge army. The Taoist said that he didn't expect that one day a third-rank undead would bow to him like that. And for a moment, the dark-haired girl thought that it was a dream. Looking at the black-haired guy, the man could not believe that the master was so strong. The quietest of the group was the nun. She looked down, not moving, as if bowing her head. Suddenly, unable to bear it any longer, she screamed. Turning to the Heavenly Tao, she screamed that he couldn't just leave like that. Pointing her finger at the kneeling skeletons, she shouted that they were undead and that if he let them go, they would kill a lot of people. Hearing these screams, the main character stopped and looked in her direction. With a cold-blooded look, the guy asked her what actions she expected from him. And she, still screaming, continued to say that the guy was strong. She didn't understand why he didn't kill them. Running up to Dao, she pressed herself against him. She screamed for him to eliminate their existence because in that case, justice would be restored and the guy would become a hero. However, she immediately received a blow to the hand, and the guy threw the girl's hand off of himself. With a gloomy face, he asked if she really meant to say that the weak should not exist. He also asked if this was the teaching of the god of light, at which moment all the pressure of the red-headed girl disappeared. And Dao continued, saying that from the point of view of the god of light, the soul is just an insignificant creature. The fact that they are different does not make them bad at all. Everyone should be equal before everyone else, regardless of faith and race. After all, if you start killing everyone who is weaker, then this will clearly not be considered worthy. Hearing these words, the dark-haired commander intervened in their conversation, asking Heavenly Dao if he was familiar with the first generation of the God of Light. Naturally, the guy answered negatively, thinking that she was joking. In response, the girl grabbed her head, apologizing for her stupidity. While our hero thought that the God of Light did not even have the proper classification, he could not know it. At that moment, the duo ran up to him, bowed down and held out a bag of money. They believed that he deserved to take it. However, the black-haired guy replied that he didn't need them because he enjoyed chatting with them, and in addition to that, he had a new task. Having opened the system, he added a clause about religion, and as he left, he suggested that they disperse. Suddenly he stopped, reminding everyone that God exists. After all, in his opinion, God is a stronger being, very similar to man, adding that if they work hard, they can become him. Having said goodbye, in an instant he disappeared from the place where he stood. The three standing there guessed that the heavenly Tao was much stronger than a god. The main character himself, along with his companion, found themselves somewhere in the sky. King Tian asked the master why the boy wanted to help these mortals, and he explained that he wanted to restore the rule of heaven, and mortals were the most important part of this. She immediately put her hand to her head, saying that she understood everything. With the sweetest expression on her face, she asked shyly where they were going this time. At that very second, mana began to appear around our heroes, which surrounded them more and more with each turn. Our heroes went to the underworld. In this very underground world, skulls were flying right across the sky. The underground world was frightening, with its atmosphere and the aura that reigned there. Bones were sticking out of the ground, and skulls were lying on the ground. The undead made eerie sounds similar to animals. The underground world was completely immersed in darkness, and there was a thick smell of rot. A dark window began to appear in the air, accompanied by a powerful gust of wind. 2 light balls flew out of it and quickly flew downwards. When it fell to the ground, a fairly powerful explosion occurred. As soon as the dust from the explosion settled, the first thing that appeared were the legs, standing on broken bones. Looking around with some disgust, Heavenly Tao said that the hospitality here was too good. The system explained that this is the underworld, one of the 3 worlds, responsible for death and reincarnation. Looking around again, the boy laughed and said that all he saw was a dilapidated dump of dead garbage. Qing Tian clenched her fist and immediately said that such views were not worthy of the eyes of the Heavenly Tao. She was about to get to the bottom of it, but the black-haired man stopped her. He waved his hand and explained to the girl that the undead, low-ranking creatures lacking intelligence, did not need to waste their strength on them. The system was curious as to why Tao was not prejudiced against the undead, to which he replied that the existence of the undead was in accordance with the rules of heaven, adding that at the moment reincarnation is broken, so they all remained dead without reason. Looking up, he saw a dark ball, which was responsible for this very violation. The girl standing nearby, looking closely, did not understand what they should do with all this. In an instant, the black-haired guy moved them straight to the dark ball, and then he slowly reached out to him, with a smile on his face, saying that they would change everything. The system immediately shouted loudly for Tao to stop. He said that although he was able to recreate reincarnation, it would take too much strength, so he would be vulnerable, explaining that Tao would most likely be able to withstand the first blow. But as soon as the second one is struck, it will already cause injury. The main reason is that the Tao cannot be influenced during the construction of reincarnation, otherwise nothing will work. It is these words that the Tao considered a problem. He immediately became thoughtful and began to look around, and then look carefully towards your faithful companion. With a clearly unkind smile, he began to reach towards the girl, grabbing her hand, which surprised her quite a bit. And then he came closer to him, hugging her around the waist, thereby embarrassing her. With a sweet voice, he asked the frightened woman if she would help him. At that very second, the girl's entire body was covered in an aura that began to emerge. While she couldn't get enough of looking at the guy, Dao said that she would lend him her power, asking them to reconstruct reincarnation together. The aura that had just poured out of the girl's body began to gradually envelop the body of our main character. At that very second, a huge ball appeared around them. As the girl became wetter with each passing second, Dao was about to begin. As soon as his hand came as close as possible to the dark ball, it immediately began to emit energy. Immediately, the whole world shook. The earth began to tremble, and the wind blew with such speed that it seemed it would blow away everything in its path. Naturally, all the residents immediately turned their attention to the sky because they felt incredible power. From the rough bones lying on the ground, a hand appeared, and then a voice was heard. The skeleton began to wave his hand, shouting that his head hurt. Suddenly, he grabbed one of the lying skulls, saying that it was his. Having put it on, he began to look at the sky, at that very glow. It was a divine-level warrior, Gui Di, who did not understand whether this was the end of an era or a rebirth. Once again, he began to peer carefully into the distance. But as soon as he looked closely, he immediately began to shout that this was a great reincarnation, realizing that the heavenly Tao itself was doing this, not understanding how this was even possible. After all, at first they fought with Yuan Xuan from the ancient family for control of reincarnation. The latter received half the power, but the reincarnation process was disrupted. And from then on, the first and second cycles ended. He didn't understand why it was in this cycle that reincarnation changed. He also didn't understand how the heavenly Tao changed its appearance, because before it changed to female or male. Although he immediately dismissed these thoughts because it was not important, he was glad, because Tao himself took the initiative. Right behind him, one of the undead looked at her hands and wondered who he was. Naturally, the defender of reincarnation immediately cast his gaze back. After all, right behind his back, all those who had recently been completely brainless began to talk, fearfully asking what had happened to them. The skeleton was amazed at the power of the Tao, realizing that he could suffer if he took even one step. He also realized that reincarnation had changed, and it wasn't just the dead who were left in a winning position. Falling to the ground, he exhaled easily, saying that he needed to forget, because this time, the master would sort everything out himself. Besides, he also understood that there were strong people left right here, so he was just going to watch the show. Immediately, various creatures appeared in the air, surrounded by a dark aura. There were quite a lot of them. They were both people and undead, animals. Qingxian immediately noticed that several creatures had appeared near them, but the main character, hugging the girl tighter, asked her not to worry, because he would ensure her safety. It was after these words that he raised his hand and snapped his finger. Right in the center of the creatures that appeared, a clone of the main character appeared. The heavenly Tao sent him to handle the job of a guard. The girl didn't understand why Tao wouldn't let her go and deal with them, to which the protagonist only smiled, thinking that if he allowed her to enter the fight, then she could, in a fit of passion, destroy the world before he could restore reincarnation. The clone himself told the creatures that he would give them two options. The first was to return back, and the second was their death. They naturally were surprised by what they heard and began to carefully examine the enemy who appeared out of nowhere. But not everyone was so smart. Most of them immediately began to scream angrily, rushing into battle. Seeing this reaction, the clone of the main character smiled, now understanding why the first and second cycles had such an outcome. None of the opponent's attacks reached their target. The dark clone did not understand whether this was all that the creatures were capable of, since he was only just beginning to warm up. While he was dodging, a magician appeared right behind him, who began to create a spell using the increase in pressure. As soon as he cast his spell, an incredible force began to act on the clone, pulling him down. Unable to stay in the air, the dark-haired man fell down, landing straight on the ground. However, once the dust settled, the protagonist remained standing, surprised that someone here had control over the force of gravity. Next to enter the fray was Slot, the first known Rat Clan assassin to possess enhanced speed. With incredible speed, he began to approach the ball where the real body of Tao was located. He understood that this mission was especially for him. He was going to destroy the ball and kill the magician. The girl was the first to speak about the attack, telling her master that they were under attack. But the main character only pressed her even tighter, asking her not to worry. And later he asked her not to look at it at all, because right at that moment a clone approached the rat, who grabbed him by the head, which surprised him quite a lot, because he didn't even feel it approaching. With incredible force, he launched the monster straight into the ground, once again raising a column of dust on the ground. As soon as she settled, a rat appeared, lying on the ground, trembling. The clone folded his arms and said that he shouldn't go that far. At that moment, the same magician who used gravity was trembling with fear. The evil creatures continued to scream, suggesting that they all attack at once. They were confident that they would succeed. Therefore, after these words, a whole horde of monsters began to approach our hero. The clone laughed and raised his hand, saying that he would now show them his strength. And then he corrected himself, because he was going to show not just strength, but absolute strength. Immediately, each of the attackers felt incredible pressure. Not only were they unable to move, they even had difficulty breathing. At that very second, the main character's clone pointed down, ordering everyone to kneel. All the attacking creatures rushed straight to the ground with incredible force. Each of them was trembling on their knees. No one could move. All this was observed by more intelligent creatures who did not immediately enter into battle, discussing the incredible, terrifying power of his opponent. Suddenly, right behind them, a rather loud laugh was heard. The skeleton, sitting on an equally skeletal dragon, loudly declared that no one had visited the underworld with such force for a long time. It was the skeleton knight, Wanhai, who wanted to test the power of this creature. Upon seeing him, everyone immediately recognized this skeleton. One of the creatures said that he had heard that in the first cycle he was the most powerful knight, and even after death he had not exhausted his strength, thinking to himself, "This is one of the most powerful beings in the world." The knight himself shouted that all the treasures should belong to him, and then aimed at the clone, adding that those who stood in his way should die. Looking at the flying attack, the dark silhouette of the main character laughed and said that he missed. The skeleton knight found these words insolent. Therefore, he immediately began to release his power, which made even the strongest creatures of the underworld tremble. Creatures that were weaker also began to emit their mana. Screams began to be heard all over the world. These were screams of pain. All the energy that was sucked out of their bodies went straight to this knight. The strongest beings were surprised, because they could not even imagine how strong Wang Hai was during his life. The skeleton itself continued to absorb all the energy, and then he rushed into the attack, intending to destroy his opponent with one attack. But here too, our main character dodged without any effort. And then, clenching his fist, he sent it towards the approaching enemy. A second later, the fist reached its target, landing right on Wanhai's face, causing his teeth to start flying out. For just a moment, the world around them seemed to freeze. But as soon as this moment passed, the skeleton knight immediately flew back with great speed from where he came. Flying, he did not understand how this was even possible because he was the strongest. But he didn't hear an answer, falling straight to the ground. The skeletal dragon was also destroyed by the recoil, shattering into tiny bones. Seeing this, the most powerful creatures of the underworld did not understand how such a thing was even possible. Looking towards the silhouette, they did not understand where it got such power from. The clone immediately glanced towards the remaining trio. Using the system, he determined that the people in front of him were of average rank. With a smile, he said that he was glad, because not everyone had run away yet. He immediately appeared right behind them, asking the three if they wished to fight him. They immediately turned to him, trembling, and began to say that they had not intended to fight him. The old man explained that they only wanted to know His Excellency's name and the purpose of his visit. However, the clone, this time rudely replied that they were simply waiting in silence. Immediately, a bright glow appeared all over the world, which began to blind everyone. It came from the same ball that was in the air. They began to look at it closely, at which time the entire dark sky began to disappear. Each of them understood that they were looking at a power they could never achieve. One of the Trinity even suggested that the man in front of them was not governed by the law, but was the law himself. They were even afraid to imagine what this creature in front of them was capable of. After all, he was able to establish reincarnation, so naturally the two were surprised to hear such words. However, their conversation was immediately interrupted by the clone, who ordered them not to guess, because they would soon find out everything. The bright light itself extended further and further, illuminating the entire earth. Everyone looking at this felt some pleasant warmth. Suddenly, The skeletons began to become covered with skin. They returned to their former bodies. Looking around, they were glad, because they were once again made of flesh and blood. At that very second, their bodies began to be covered with some kind of energy, which gradually began to evaporate straight up, towards that very ball. The dark ball itself turned a pleasant blue, emitting a pleasant warmth. With a smile on his face, Heavenly Tao said that they were finished. His companion was pleasantly surprised that everything went so quickly. Looking around, the boy assumed that everything had gone well. The skeleton who was watching everything that was happening laughed. Having said that this was indeed the true power of the Heavenly Tao, she thought that it was a wonderful power. After all, this wonderful force returned everyone's souls with such ease. She wanted to thank the Heavenly Tao. The girl herself was a demon lord who, taking advantage of the moment, used body restoration. The mid-ranking beings watched the people standing below and rejoiced. They couldn't believe their eyes, because they saw a miracle. They saw how souls were improving. The old man said with a trembling voice that no one could restore broken souls. Only one could do it. Suddenly, from behind them, a voice was heard that interrupted them. The clone said that it was the Heavenly Tao who did this. Right there, in place of the clone, our main character appeared with his companion. They sensed the appearance of a new creature and immediately turned their attention to it. With a trembling voice, the black-haired girl asked if he was a Heavenly Tao. Naturally, the blonde girl immediately started screaming, shouting how they dared to address him so carelessly, but the protagonist asked her not to be nervous. And then, he said with pride, he said that he was the Heavenly Tao. The trio's bodies trembled. They could not believe that the most powerful being stood before them. The black-haired woman, clutching herself, said that she still had not recovered from the disaster of the second cycle, not wanting to experience something like that again. The main character immediately approached her, saying that he wanted to ask her something. Looking around, he said that he had discovered that many had escaped the disaster, and he was curious about what had happened. Immediately, the girl's gaze changed. She looked gloomily towards the guy. Having said in a trembling voice about some secret world, naturally, our hero knew nothing about this world. Therefore, she immediately explained that if there were enough resources in the secret world, it would be possible to survive the disaster. Thinking about it, Dao suggested that the survivors relied on the resources of their own little world. After thinking about this, he asked the next question, asking if they had the strength to resist the Heavenly Tao. The red-haired woman joined the conversation, saying that there were more than 100 heavenly forces in the world. The old man added that they had worked together to resist the heavens, but in the end, only a dozen supporters survived. The black-haired girl intervened in their conversation and asked why they had caused this disaster. The system immediately told the guy that they would not be able to accept the fact that the Heavenly Tao could even change people. After thinking for a bit, he exhaled heavily, realizing that there was nothing else to do. Having answered the girl, saying that the underworld is already the pinnacle of existence, it is inevitable that it too will be affected by a change in the laws. But not everyone has the law, only a limited number of people. Creatures without it see that others have it, so they begin to fight. The Heavenly Tao distributes opportunities equally among people. But gradually the balance of power was disturbed, looking towards the light ball. Citing him as an example, the reincarnation of this world was disrupted. It was because the head of the Huangtian Yuan Xuan clan and the Demon Lord began to fight each other that the reincarnation was eventually disrupted. Since then, reincarnation has lost its power, which led to such consequences. So they wanted to keep most people alive, otherwise this world would end. After thinking about these words for a while, the red-haired girl said that in the past, they were only obsessed with cultivation, so they didn't pay attention to others. Dao responded immediately, saying that no matter how strong a person is, he will, in any case, one day make a mistake, so it is very important to correct it in time. After a short pause, Dao, with a smile on his face, offered them a chance, asking if they would like to join him. Those who heard this proposal were naturally very surprised. Our protagonist's companion herself wasn't particularly pleased, saying that the trio weren't strong enough and therefore weren't worthy of his attention. But Dao did not agree with her, because he would need any help, even though they were powerless against him. In their world, they were among the most powerful. He might as well add that reincarnation is not perfect. After all, reincarnation has a mechanism for the natural absorption of souls, so weak souls are more susceptible to absorption. But for being superior to gods and kings, the power of reincarnation is so important. And then, Pointing to the Trinity, he declared that their strength was needed more than ever. After all, when danger arises, they will transfer the soul of their rival to the sphere of reincarnation. After thinking for a bit, he declared that this profession would be called the Devil's Messengers, and the organization itself will be called the Afterlife. Naturally, King Xian immediately supported the title, calling it magnificent. The trio themselves were stunned by such a proposal. They couldn't even utter a sound. With her whole appearance, the blonde showed that they had no right to refuse. The duo immediately began to bow, accepting the offer from the protagonist. The only black-haired one remained lost in her thoughts. And then she loudly declared that she would join, but only on one condition. Hearing this, Qingxian immediately began to bark at her, but Dao stopped her, saying that she was right, because only mutual benefit could make their cooperation real. Without even letting the girl begin to speak, he asked if she really wanted him to heal her wound, to which she immediately nodded in the affirmative, immediately turning his back to the main character. Throwing off her clothes from her back, she explained that this wound was stopped by the demonic wolf Taiku, and that to heal it, the juice of the tree of life from the elven forest was needed. After thinking about it, the black-haired man suggested that he should go there. After thinking for a bit, the main character agreed to the girl's terms, and she immediately thanked the gentleman. At this moment, the main character also realized that he needed a manager here. His companion immediately announced that she had a proposal, having said that Yu Mingtian would be the best fit. Hearing this name, Heavenly Dao immediately opened the system. The black-haired girl was a reverse heavenly rank, first challenging the heavens and then being defeated by the Ice Demon Lord's sword. Dao turned to the system, asking if they could resurrect her, to which she replied that it was within Dao's power. Having heard a positive answer, our heroes immediately set off to resurrect the black-haired girl. The Trinity continued to look in the direction where our heroes stood. At the same time, they were rushing somewhere at incredible speed. Our main character's companion had a question. She turned to the gentleman, having said that it was obvious that they themselves could heal her wound, so why go to the elven forest? She did not understand this. With a smile on his face, Dao said that she didn't understand, because it was like completing a mission from an NPC. She still didn't understand her master's train of thought. And so, a few seconds later, our heroes arrived at their destination. Looking ahead, the black-haired boy's expression changed slightly. He saw a black-haired girl who was completely chained. This was the same Yu Mingtian for whom they had come here. As he approached her, he continued to look around carefully. As soon as he came closer to her, the boy reached out to her. Taking hold of her face, he lifted it to examine it closely. She didn't react in any way. The Heavenly Dao was convinced that the girl was dead. He said that even though she was killed and sealed, her aura was just like that of a living person. The system explained that among the 5 incarnations of heaven, Qingtian's power was the weakest, to which the boy replied that it was a blessing that she couldn't hear him. Letting go of the black-haired girl's face, Dao was about to begin the resurrection. The system immediately reminded the guy that the resurrection of the incarnations of heaven takes away a considerable amount of power from the Dao, which cannot be returned to the master again. After thinking about it, the black-haired man realized that even if the girl died, the power would not return, because he completely transferred part of his power to her. By sticking 2 fingers into his head, he decided to transfer only 1% of his powers. It was after these words that he took out a small ball from his head. Immediately, the entire cave was illuminated by an incredible force, which even began to rage. Qingtian could barely stay on her feet because the flow of power was too strong. Just a moment later, the entire area was illuminated by bright lights, or rather, by the power of our main character. The Trinity itself was talking at that moment, discussing the Heavenly Dao. Suddenly, the black-haired man's power even reached them, and they could barely restrain themselves from fainting. They immediately realized that this was the power of the Heavenly Dao. They did not understand why their master would release so much power, assuming that he wanted to get rid of the boundaries. The power itself began to spread throughout the entire area, further and further. Even that same demonic woman felt it, although she was very far away. She didn't understand what Dao wanted to do, assuming that he realized that she was alive. But our main character himself only wanted to resurrect the girl. Realizing that the force had spread too far, he clenched his fist. All this pressure of energy immediately disappeared, and Qingtian, standing behind him, turned to the guy in fear. Dao immediately interrupted her, apologizing, because when he released the power, he forgot to direct it in the right direction. I thought to myself, I didn't expect that the powers of the heavenly Tao were so terrifying and amazing. Holding a grain of his power, Tao presented a piece of his power to the girl's body. And then, just as he had entered himself, he entered her with 2 fingers. Immediately, a dense beam of light began to beat from her chest. The black-haired girl's eyes opened and she took a deep breath. But her gaze was completely fixed on our main character. The chains that held her were completely broken. Before she had even had time to come to her senses, she immediately rushed to hug the main character, with words about how he had finally come for her. Her face immediately turned red and her eyes filled with tears. She was glad to see her master. An awkward silence fell between them. At that very moment, Qingtian ran up to them and pushed the 2 away, saying that they didn't need to be so close. The black-haired woman, wiping away her tears, apologized, saying that she was emotional. Having stood up, our hero continued to look towards the black-haired girl. She, seeing this look, immediately fell on one knee, thanking the gentleman and promising that she would never let him down again. For a few more minutes, our hero looked at the girl. But afterward, he said that he resurrected her to give her one task. He told her that from today on, she would be the manager of the Afterlife organization. Her task was to build the afterlife and ensure the safety of reincarnation. The system immediately began to mock the main character because he gave 2 tasks. Looking at Qingtian's side, Dao was surprised because their characters were too different. The boy himself said that he couldn't stand having 2 girls around him because one was enough for him. Hearing this, Yu Mingtian immediately jumped up, asking if the master would not stay with her in the underworld. However, Qingtian responded to this by clinging to Dao. She replied that the master had other things to do, so she would be here alone. Pushing the blonde away, Dao put his hand on the black-haired one, saying that she was one of the incarnations of heaven. He asked the girl to act more confidently, adding that he had already completed his reincarnation, so she only needed to become the ruler of the afterlife. After thinking for a moment, Yu Mingtian nodded positively, taking in as much air as she could. And then, using her power, she screamed for everyone to hear her. She screamed for everyone to listen to her carefully, because everyone now lives in the underworld. Now they obey her. From this moment on, she will rule this world and also help the heavenly Tao in governing the entire earth. Now they will work for the benefit of the heavenly Tao, and the higher-ranking beings will be responsible for construction work. Powerful beings will become messengers of the devil, going after souls to lead them to reincarnation. She has no intention of forgiving those who disobey her. Hearing this, the gray-haired girl clicked her tongue angrily, and Yu Mingtian continued, shouting that if they disobeyed, they would immediately be regarded as enemies of the heavenly Tao. Hearing these words, the black-haired hero appreciated Mingtian's abilities. With a smile on his face, he said that there would be no problems if he left the world to her. After a short pause, Qingtian asked the master where they would be going this time, to which, without even a moment's hesitation, Dao declared, "To the Elven Forest." And so, sometime later, our heroes set off on their journey. At this time, a huge number of people were riding in the forest. They were happy because they had taken possession of a huge number of high elves, and they were about to become rich. Young girls with long ears sat in the cages. The face of one of them was not cheerful, she was angry. Hearing these joyful cries, one of the men shouted at everyone to stop immediately. Chewing on one of the branches, he declared that even before leaving the forest, one must not let down one's guard. It was the leader of the Earth Dragon kidnapping group, a 3rd-rank knight, Sabi. They did not understand why the commander was so cautious, because no one would dare to go against them. Suddenly, a silhouette appeared right in front of them. It was the same silhouette that appeared exclusively on slave traders. Upon seeing him, the crowd immediately began to scream angrily, shouting that they were from the earthly dragon itself. But the dark silhouette didn't care. He raised his hand, pointing somewhere ahead. They, looking at the trajectory of his hands, realized that he was pointing at the cage. To some extent, this even caused laughter among the slave traders, because someone dared to look at their prey. As soon as the silhouette realized that they did not understand him, a huge spear immediately appeared in his hand. The whole crowd burst into laughter when they saw the spear, as he was going to use it in close combat. The dark silhouette itself crouched at that moment, placing its hand on the ground. Immediately, a huge magic circle appeared right under his body. And then came a wild, loud, and animalistic roar. Then huge paws with sharp claws appeared. As soon as the whole body appeared, everyone around realized that it was a dragon in front of them. Their faces were no longer so pleased, because in front of them stood a fifth-rank dragon. Seeing this shadow, the elves rejoiced, because they were about to be saved, assuming that the elf lord heard their prayers and therefore sent him to save them. However, one of the girls sitting at a distance understood that this was not the case. After all, if this really is the Lord of the Elves, an elven angel should have appeared. But in front of them there is a dark silhouette. The commander himself was already panicking, shouting that he didn't care where the enemy came from, offering to give up 2 slaves. But the dark silhouette began to wave his hand from side to side, indicating refusal. Raising his hand, he began to draw attention to her. By squeezing it, he conveyed the thought, saying with this movement that he needed them all. Naturally, the commander realized this and immediately began to shout angrily at the enemy because they had spent too much time and effort on capturing them. Looking at his dragon's behavior, he saw that it was calm, so he assumed that it was a fake. He immediately ordered his subordinates to kill the enemy. Seeing them attacking him, the dark dragon opened his mouth and began to gather strength. And then he released a huge flame that struck all his opponents. As soon as the flames calmed down a little, naked bodies appeared. The commander, seeing this picture, immediately broke out in sweat. But the dark silhouette was not going to stop there. He rushed into battle, destroying his opponents. People flew in different directions. They could do nothing to resist the powerful creature. Loud explosions were heard throughout the forest, and flames rose to the sky. Seeing this, the face of the recently appointed commander was plunged into horror. Sitting on his vaunted dragon, he trembled, asking the dark silhouette not to come near him. His opponent himself approached, swinging his weapon several times. Naturally, upon seeing this, the man immediately screamed, because he thought that death had overtaken him. However, the silhouette was not hitting him, but the cage standing behind him. As soon as it broke, 3 girls appeared sitting on the floor. Approaching them, the dark silhouette slowly looked at them. The bravest of them thanked the man. The recently trembling commander was about to take advantage of this inattention, shouting that he shouldn't turn his back on his enemy. He was about to kill the dark silhouette. The girl, seeing this picture, became afraid for her savior, to which the silhouette, continuing to stand with its back turned, threw its spear back. The throw was so powerful that it pierced the dragon and then caught up with its rider. Blood began to scatter in all directions. The commander, coughing up blood, did not understand how this had happened. Falling to the ground, he began to choke on his own blood. Seeing that their commander was dead, his subordinates immediately began to scatter in different directions. They understood that a real monster stood before them. As they ran, they saw a crowd of elves in front of them, thinking that they would help them. However, the one running in front immediately received an arrow right in the forehead. The elves had no intention of leaving the invaders alive. The girl said loudly that the 3rd detachment of the Guardian Legion had arrived to save the refugees. Suddenly, one of the men said that there was something there. Pointing at the Dark Knight, he said that he saved their comrades. One of the elves grabbed the running man, declaring that he would sell him to the nobles. The dark silhouette, hearing this, immediately began to changed to an elf-like silhouette, as he declared the slave trade. The elf himself continued to threaten the man, saying that he would make money off of him. Without realizing it, he received an arrow to the head. His comrades immediately turned their attention to their friend, because they also did not understand what had just happened. Suddenly, one of the squad leaders realized that it was that same silhouette that did it. Raising her bow, she shouted to her comrades to prepare for battle. But one of the elves stood in front of him, shouting at them not to do this. The elves did not understand what was happening, why their relative was protecting this man. And the girl explained that he had done nothing wrong, explaining that a man only brings justice to the world. Naturally, the commander of this detachment did not understand what she meant, asking again. And so, sometime later, the dark silhouette was already freeing the slaves. The girls thanked him while he tried to untie the ropes as carefully as possible. Watching this, the commander listened to her fellow tribesmen explain that the man only attacks those who intend to sell another person. After all, this is true for both the kidnappers and the keepers, so until he senses the intent to sell, the silhouette does not attack. Having heard these explanations, the commander immediately declared that her allies should not take anyone. The dark silhouette itself looked around carefully, and then, with the same piercing gaze, he began to disappear right before everyone's eyes. Seeing this naturally, every elf was surprised, because they had never seen anything like this before. The fair-haired girl herself, clasping her hands, mentally thanked her savior. At that very moment, our main character kept sneezing. Qingtian even began to worry about him while he explained to her that he just got something in his nose. Standing in the air and watching everything that was happening, our heroes exchanged glances. Qingtian noticed that some kind of fight had taken place here since they were cleaning up. The black-haired boy himself was happy because his law had come into force. Some dark energy appeared behind him. They were rapidly approaching our main character, but they flew past him, falling straight to the ground. From this energy appeared bodies in clothes with covered faces. These were the messengers of the devil. The same rescued elf noticed some strange force and paid attention to it. She saw some ghosts emerging from the dead, covered bodies. They immediately put chains on them right around their necks, and the souls began to scream. But the devil's messengers were not going to back down, explaining to them that they should have been more honest. Having captured everyone, they went to the afterlife while the elf watched all this. Looking up at the sky, she couldn't believe her eyes, and she also didn't understand why everyone around her wasn't paying attention to it. The squad leader approached her and asked what was going on, but without waiting for an answer, she suggested that she go back. The elf thought to herself about what she had just seen. Something incredible. Watching this, the heavenly Tao rejoiced again, because the transition to the afterlife was working successfully. Qingtian, standing behind him, praised the master because it was all thanks to him. Tao himself asked the girl not to forget why they came here, and he began to think about it to himself. That their next destination is the capital of the elves, the city of life, Kayal. The weather was fine in the city itself, where the former prisoners arrived. They were told that from that moment on, all those saved would be responsible for the cleanliness of the city, because elves do not raise lazy people. The fair-haired girl was given a broom, and she took it with trepidation, and later she cast her gaze somewhere to the side, to where her gaze was drawn. Looking at the huge tree, she thought that she was finally able to return. At that moment, a pleasant breeze arose as a carriage passed behind her. The girl immediately noticed a sound coming from behind her. However, at that moment she also looked up at the tallest building. The carriage moved on, passing through the city streets. Our main character stopped and came out of the first one, and his companion came out after him. They were prepared, so they looked like elves. At this moment, Heavenly Tao checked the girl's ears, because thanks to them they would blend in with the crowd. An elf with a cane walking behind him asked a servant girl walking next to him how many minerals these lower races had dug up today, to which he immediately received the answer that it was the same as usual. Tao was watching all this, and other elves were sitting on the ground at the feet of this milord, asking for a coin. After observing for only a few minutes, Tao said that he had nothing against the aristocracy, but there was a big gap between the poor and the rich, and this depressed him. The system immediately told the guy that he was a heavenly Tao and could wipe out the entire aristocracy from the face of the earth in an instant if he wanted, but he immediately dismissed the idea. Having said that, to achieve equality, the disadvantaged must fight themselves. The intervention of third parties will only turn them from victims into yet another criminal. The system assessed this answer, telling the boy that he was becoming more and more like a true heavenly Tao. The black-haired man folded his arms and took it as a compliment, beginning to peer into the distance. Seeing that the world tree was in good condition, he wondered if it was related to the elven god, to which he immediately received a positive answer. Qingtian asked the gentleman if he wanted to find the elven god, to which he immediately received a positive answer. Walking away, she clenched her fist, saying with a gloomy expression that in this case she would burn the world tree, so the girl would immediately show up. The protagonist immediately stopped her, saying that he just wanted to talk and not fight, after receiving a punch in the forehead. Naturally, the blonde didn't understand this and immediately started shouting that this girl was a rebel in the second cycle and there was nothing to talk about with her. At that moment, she received a second blow to the forehead, because that was precisely why Tao believed that she simply needed to be talked to. He wanted to understand what the rebels were thinking. He also proudly declared that those who have many friends have few enemies. They must acquire as many allies as possible. Suddenly, a loud shout interrupted the conversation, ordering them to get out of the way. Turning around, Tao saw the elves running away while a girl rushed past, shouting for everyone to get out of the way. The cart flew straight towards our heroes, while they continued to stand still. With a smile on her face, the girl shouted at the duo to listen to her, because if they died, it was not her fault. This yellow-haired girl was the elven princess Utia. The black-haired hero continued to stand in his place as if nothing had happened, without even flinching, while the elven princess continued to shout at the duo. The monster, having hit our hero's body, began to pass right through him. Just like the carriage, it drove right over our guy. Heavenly Tao remained in his place, looking in the direction of the departing one. The system said it was a golden princess who was in the middle of the third rank. The black-haired boy noticed the girl's bad manners, saying that if it had been someone else in his place, he would have slapped her and thrown her into a pile of black orcs. He was distracted from these evil thoughts by a girl who, using her energy, rushed past him at great speed. There was a grandfather standing in the princess's path, who apparently did not hear her screams. He was crossing the road carefree. The same elf who used her energy ran towards her grandfather, intending to save him. At the very last moment, she managed to grab him and drag him out of the way. Yutia herself, as she was leaving, angrily shouted at all the vagabonds to watch where they were going. Sitting on the ground, the blonde stopped releasing energy, breathing heavily. Having caught her breath, she worriedly asked her grandfather if everything was okay with him, to which he nodded his head. Looking around, the girl did not understand why all the elves were like this. Grandpa thanked his savior, saying that he wished for the elven goddess to protect her. Hearing about the mother goddess, the girl became sad and lowered her gaze. She was distracted from her own thoughts by applause. It came from our main character, who considered the girl to be quite kind. Turning towards the guy, the yellow-haired girl carefully asked the guy who he was, who, with the calmest possible face, replied that he was ordinary and passable. Approaching the old man, the black-haired man asked if the elven princess had always been so rude, to which he replied that it was not only the princess who was evil, but all the nobility as well. After thinking for a while, the old man explained that the fate of the elves was predetermined from birth, gold, and moon elves, members of the royal family. Sea and wood elves, artisans, gray and black elves like them can only be slaves. However, the fair-haired girl immediately exclaimed that this was not so. With a trembling voice, she shouted that one cannot determine a person's fate by his birth. She did not understand why the old man was saying that. However, this time, with a roughness in his voice, the gray-haired man said that it was all because of life expectancy. After all, the gray elves live only 1,000 years, while the golden elves live more than 5,000 years. They believed that the gods had determined their fate, and all they had to do was obey. The system confirmed the old man's words, saying that the price for this was low fertility, which was precisely one of the rules of heaven. The stronger the creature, the less likely it is to produce offspring. After some thought, Dao suggested that in this case he could have children, to which the system replied that it depended on whether he wanted it. Because he said this out loud, Qingtian immediately became furious. Her face turned red, and drool began to flow down her lips. Starting to squeeze her body from different sides, she excitedly asked the gentleman if he wanted to have a child. But without waiting for an answer, she immediately said that she was not against it. She was about to attack Dao, but he stopped her, telling her to stop immediately. Looking at this picture, the old man laughed, thinking that young people today are very energetic. He thanked the girl again and said that it was time for him to go. She sadly lowered her gaze, saying again that this should not be so. Dao, approaching the girl, said that now the elves are not at all the same as they were when she ruled. Asking if he was right, he named the girl Lulutia, the former mother goddess of the elves. Immediately, her face plunged into darkness. She looked angrily towards our main character. Immediately, a huge flurry of force began to expand in different directions, breaking even the ground. The main character did not even flinch. Releasing more and more energy, she asked the black-haired man who he was. With a smile on his face, the black-haired man praised her for knowing the heavenly Tao, asking if she was a rebel. She immediately yelled at the guy, saying that he was not Tao because she personally saw her. At that moment, Tao thought, because the girl needed to explain everything somehow differently. After thinking for a moment, he happily snapped his finger. At that very second, a huge blue ball rose up right next to them. She looked around and did not understand what was happening right now. And just as immediately, she was surprised to realize that her powers were blocked. Coming closer, our main character grabbed the girl's cheeks. With a smile on his face, he asked if she believed him now. The yellow-haired girl thought to herself that the guy's movements were too fast because he was able to get close to her so quickly. She immediately hit him on the hand, thereby forcing him to let go of her. Looking at the guy standing in front of her, she thought that she needed to act. Gathering her energy, she rushed at the standing, unarmed opponent. However, he didn't even have to release a fraction of his power. After all, Qingtian arrived in time and finished off the attacker's attack in an instant. The blue-haired girl was angry, calling the girl a disgusting rebel. She angrily asked how she dared to behave like that with her master, at some point adding that she was playing with death. Naturally, feeling the power, the mother goddess immediately jumped to the side, thinking that her soul had only just begun to recover, and her strength was now barely reaching the peak of the 5th rank. She needed to escape as soon as possible. Having activated her staff, she was going to use spatial movement. She successfully managed to use it, so it instantly evaporated. Seeing this, the Heavenly Tao appreciated the girl's abilities, because a 5th rank elven mage was a real rarity. However, he also added that he felt sorry for her, because she had encountered the Heavenly Tao. At that time, she hit her face quite hard from the ball that our hero had erected. The powerful recoil caused her to fall to the ground, raising a column of dust. As soon as it dissipated, a yellow-haired girl appeared, who seemed to have broken through the ground due to the fall. She couldn't believe it, because no one had ever stopped her teleportation before. She was distracted from her own thoughts by Qingtian, who slammed the girl's head into the ground. And then she began to twist her arms. The mother goddess screamed in pain. Sitting on the elf's back, the protagonist's companion grabbed her by the hair, lifting her head. With a terrifying and gloomy voice, Qingtian told her that she had been captured. As calmly as possible, the black-haired man approached and ordered his companion to let the rebel go. She tried to object, because this is the mother goddess who constantly rebels against the heavens, but the main character insisted that she let her go. Puffing out her cheeks, the blue-haired girl let go of the yellow-haired goddess. She stood up and listened as the Heavenly Tao asked her if he believed her now. The girl, exhaling heavily, looked towards the guy and began to examine him carefully. At that very moment, he put his hand on her shoulder, telling her not to worry, because he just wanted to ask her a few questions. At this moment, she thought that in this situation, Dongfang Hyotian would not be able to escape, so she could only cooperate. Roughly, she asked the guy what he wanted to ask. Hearing this question, Dao praised her because she agreed to cooperate with him. This time, more cold-bloodedly, Dao asked what the rebels' plan was. However, the girl, without even thinking, answered that she knew absolutely nothing about it. She explained that although she was a member of the Second Cycle rebels, she did not know what their plan was against the heavens in the 3rd calendar, adding that even if Dongfang himself or anyone else were here, they would not have said anything. Naturally, Qingtian immediately pounced on the girl, starting to bite her and screaming for her to tell her everything immediately. Heavenly Tao immediately pulled her away, asking his companion to calm down, explaining to her that the elven gods were considered to be of average power, so it was normal that she didn't know anything. The second question was why she hated heaven. A smile immediately appeared on the mother goddess's face. She began to tell that in the 1st cycle she was a goddess born with the world tree. Along with the world tree, they protected the birth and growth of the elves, prosperity and happiness still fresh in memory. But at the end of the 1st cycle, she witnessed the catastrophe with her own eyes, barely surviving as the world tree was transformed back into a seed. Gritting her teeth in anger, she asked Dao if he was really asking why she hated the heavens. With a heavy sigh, the guy said that the previous Heavenly Tao had screwed up. His last question was what she thought was the most important thing in her heart. She, naturally, having heard this question, thought about it. With warmth in her voice, she replied that she simply wanted to live and protect her people forever. Hearing this answer, a smile appeared on Dao's face, and he asked if she could become a protector. She got angry when she heard such words addressed to her, to which the boy again, with a smile on his face, asked to look the truth in the eye. With a snap of their fingers, they immediately disappeared from the place where they were, moving to the elven forest mines. In the distance, they saw some shadows moving along long tunnels. The mother of the elves asked where they were, to which Dao replied that this place was called a good place to earn money. Suddenly, a painful cry was heard, straight from the depths. Looking closely, they saw one of the girls receive a whip on the back. A man stood over her, ordering the slave in a rough voice to move, because if they were late with the delivery, they would be flogged. There were quite a few of these overseers. They drove the slaves to work, shouting and beating them. Naturally, seeing such a picture, the mother goddess became angry. She did not understand how these worthless people could do this to their own people. To which Dao replied that he could only stop the slave trade, adding that if it was only slavery, then the black silhouettes would not appear. The goddess immediately became thoughtful, realizing that the man who had slept with her was created by the power of Dao. She did not understand when Dao became so kind. Therefore, she immediately asked, if the goal is to save slaves, Why not use force against pure slavery? To which the guy said that she did not understand, explaining that slaves do not only appear because of the slave trade, since criminals and prisoners are also slaves. He asked the elf if she wanted to save them too. She said that she hated the killing, persecution, and oppression in the slave trade, to which the heavenly Tao replied that all of these were present in her race. And then, again, just like last time, he grabbed the girl by the face. Pressing her to himself, he told her not to shift the responsibility onto him. The girl didn't understand. Because Tao had the power to change all of this, she wondered why he couldn't save more people. At that very second, the black-haired guy squeezed the girl's cheeks. After asking her to think about it, he asked her what she did when the heavenly Tao wanted to change everything. He asked the girl why the heavenly kingdom was devastated, and then asked why the heavenly world with the most resources, why the rebirth was disrupted. She, breaking free from the guy's arms, screamed that they just wanted to live a normal life. Tao pointed his hand towards the slaves, saying that their people too were seeking a better life by oppressing their own kind. Naturally, the mother goddess of the elves did not agree with these words. Having grabbed the guy, she began to scream hysterically that this was all because he wanted to take the power of all creatures for himself in order to become stronger. Because if they did not resist, they would die. Hearing these words, the heavenly Tao laughed, saying that the power of the heavenly Tao comes from all beings. The death of all beings weakens the power of the heavenly Tao. He asked to tell him why the heavenly Tao, instead of destroying the strongest beings, destroys everyone. She immediately grabbed her head and started screaming that she didn't know. At that very second, the black-haired man raised his hand and began to project something, saying that the girl knew nothing. So he can tell her how it really is. She, seeing what Tao was showing her, was surprised, and then her whole body shuddered. A mini-skeleton appeared in his hand. The black-haired man asked the girl if she understood what it was. Having told that she was the one who had just appeared after the cycle, at that moment she completely depleted the source of the aura. The purpose of the aura source is to restore the world tree and give it its own power. Tao asked if she knew that this source of life had resurrected the continent. With a trembling face, she listened to Tao's questions about how many people would have been born if she had not taken away the source of life. How many sources of life there were in her small world. Realizing what the guy was getting at, she fell to her knees. With a trembling voice, she screamed that she knew all this. But afterward, she began to scream again that she simply wanted to live. Because if the Tao had not destroyed all living things, she would not have needed a source of life to be reborn. This time, the guy's face changed. With horror on his face, he said that she took advantage of the opportunity given to all beings by heaven. So she asked, why would the heavenly Tao destroy her? Adding that some people oppress others because of greed, and she faced the same problem with the heavenly Tao. And then, pointing to the crowd, he asked her what she would say to them, looking into their eyes. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by a cry of alarm. The elf who burst in with a sword loudly declared that the dark elf rebels had broken in. And at that very second, a sword pierced his body, covering it with blood. As soon as the man fell, a cloak with a dark spider appeared from behind his back. The assassin claimed to be Chadal, the leader of the Dark Elf resistance. And then he started shouting that he had come here to free the Dark Elves. His comrades brought a huge amount of weapons, throwing them on the ground. The Dark Elves froze in thought, looking at the weapons lying on the ground. The guards were trembling with fear and asked everyone to think carefully, because resistance never ended well. One of them had already decided everything for themselves. Their faces were angry. Taking up arms, they all began to shout as one that they needed to kill everyone who had enslaved them. Immediately, screams began to be heard, and the smell of blood began to fill the mine. Our heroes watched all this. The mother of the elves could not believe her eyes. Tears began to appear in her eyes. Covering her mouth, she asked them to stop. And then she started crying, repeating over and over again that this should not have happened. Hearing her words, Tao asked what she would do if this stopped. Having explained to the girl that if the root of the problem is not solved, then everything will happen behind her back. She immediately clenched her teeth, angrily declaring that this was all happening because of him. Immediately, the staff began to form again in her hand. She screamed that she still had strength. She was going to kill Tao. Qingtian intervened again, shouting that the rebel never learns anything. Tao immediately grabbed her, saying that the yellow-haired girl didn't understand anything. He explained to the elf that in the second cycle, the elves had already divided into upper and lower classes. She, having heard this, did not understand what the main character meant. Exhaling heavily, the black-haired man began to explain again that in the second cycle, the gold elves, already close to her, were already nobility, and the dark elves were written off, adding that they never considered the dark elves to be the same race. They considered them to be scum among the elves. Coming closer, he leaned toward the goddess, saying that this was precisely why the heavenly Tao, who saw the suffering of all beings, decided to destroy everything, and she did not look after her people. At that moment, tears appeared on the girl's face again, and the staff with which she was going to attack the guy gradually disappeared. With a trembling voice, lowering her gaze, she said that she was not a mother goddess. Her further words were interrupted again by the main character, who ordered her to stop crying, and then added that the problem needed to be solved. She, still lowering her gaze, said that she was too weak. Coming even closer, the main character put his hand on the girl's shoulder, asking if she had resisted when she was a slave. He wondered where her courage was, what it was like when she rebelled against the heavens. He asked to show at least half, because then the elves would change. After listening to the boy, the mother goddess lowered her eyes again. After thinking for a moment, she declared loudly that she knew. She knew what she had to do. Seeing her fighting spirit, Dao smiled and asked her interlocutor what she was going to do. After a short pause, she looked towards the crowd. He said that he would go to the Dark Elf Resistance Fortress and find out their demands. The guy praised her, because she already knows how to listen to people, saying that he would reward her for her wisdom by giving her a ride. With a snap of their fingers, the world around them changed in an instant, and then it narrowed, and a portal appeared in front of them, where our heroes headed. Qingtian continued to grumble, not understanding why her master was helping a rebel, to which Dao replied that it was better to have friends than enemies. Naturally, upon hearing these words, the girl was surprised, and then smiled and thought that it was funny. Now she began to understand the heavenly Dao a little better. Noticing that the mother goddess continued to stand in place, Dao asked why she was walking, but she immediately put her thoughts aside, declaring that she was already running. A few seconds later, a portal appeared near the Dark Elf Resistance Fortress. Our trio of heroes emerged from this portal. The yellow-haired girl continued to remain in her own thoughts. Upon entering the cave, they noticed a huge black spider. Seeing him, the mother goddess said that there were still some old acquaintances of hers here. The main character told the girl that he stopped hiding her presence so everyone can see her. This is what she was counting on, once again thanking the heavenly Tao. Entering deeper into the cave, the goddess felt someone's presence, and then I saw a group of elves who started shouting alarm. They immediately fired arrows towards the girl, intending to kill the intruder. The yellow-haired girl continued to remain in one place, watching as a huge number of arrows flew towards her. Dao laughed at the girl, asking her not to die, to which she replied that although she was weak, she was not that weak. Raising her hand, she released a small amount of energy. A shield formed in front of her, which immediately reflected all the arrows. Seeing this, the Dark Elves were surprised, because only 5th-rank mages are capable of this. One of the standing elves rushed forward, shouting that whoever it was, there was a gold elf in front of them. She had to die. Folding her hands, our heroine began to use the spell. She asked the forest to protect her, and at that very moment, a huge number of branches began to bind the attackers. Watching this, the heavenly Tao praised the elves' strength, as such strength was rare among humans. At that very moment, some strange force began to fill the cave. Looking ahead, the mother goddess realized who was approaching her. The dark-haired girl loudly ordered everyone to stop, saying that none of them were her equal. And then he even said that, in the end, a former elven goddess was standing before them. Seeing the dark-haired one, the mother goddess recognized her and smiled. The enemy's name was Grace. She was the goddess of the dark elves. Hearing this, the main character became thoughtful. Immediately using his power, he activated the eye to check these characteristics. The description was that the elven spider goddess personified the shadow under the tree and the guardian of insects. Naturally, the protagonist was surprised and asked the system why it was a 5th-rank commander, to which the system responded that there are 2 types of gods: natural gods and gods of faith. Nature gods are born by the will of heaven and are usually very powerful. Gods of faith have to draw strength from the faith of others. If there are few believers, then the strength will diminish and disappear. The dark goddess standing before our hero was the goddess of faith. The dark-haired one, seeing the fair-haired one, smiled creepily. With a disgusting voice, She said that it was good that she was alive. Naturally, the current comrade of Heavenly Tao was surprised to hear such words addressed to him. And at that very moment, the black-haired elf swung, intending to kill the goddess. But she hit the target on purpose, missing her opponent who was standing there. The mother goddess remained standing unmoved. With a worried face, the dark elf declared that he would kill her with his own hands. But she immediately shouted that no, because she came here to save the dark elves. Hearing these words, the Spider-Woman froze for a moment, not understanding what her interlocutor was saying to her. And then she laughed out loud, asking if the blonde had memory problems, poking the former mother goddess right in the forehead, which surprised her again. With a terrible face, she screamed that the dark elves had suffered injustice while she ruled, and that things were only getting worse. Only by killing her and destroying her divine image can the dark elves be saved. That's why she sent the blondes, saying that they would kill everyone. At that moment, a huge crowd of dark elves rushed to attack. The protagonist decided to intervene by snapping his fingers. Immediately, each of the attackers froze, and it seemed as if the entire world around the guy paused. Looking around, the dark goddess did not understand what was happening, why everyone had frozen. The guy responded to this by telling her not to worry, because he simply stopped time. Naturally, upon hearing about stopping time, the dark-haired girl screamed, because this couldn't happen. A smile appeared on the protagonist's face, and with it on his face, he declared that ordinary people were incapable of this. But he himself was a supreme being, the heavenly Daozan. Hearing these words, the dark-haired girl thought, thinking that this was the same one who destroyed the world in the first and second cycles. At this point, the lower part of the spider began to gradually disappear. Already standing on her feet, the girl asked if this was true, to which she received a positive answer from the black-haired man. The dark goddess thought that the blonde did not refute these words, so she immediately fell to her knees, apologizing for her behavior. Naturally, Dao held no grudges, saying that the elves still needed to ask their god. At that moment, the blonde lowered her gaze, apologizing to Grace, admitting all her mistakes. However, she stood her ground, saying that these apologies would not help the dark elves. They needed an opportunity to take revenge. But the mother goddess continued, saying that she understood their feelings, for their current state was similar to hers when she rebelled against the heavens. She added that she thought only about resisting oppression and was ready to do anything for the sake of revenge. When she created the elves, she gave each race its own characteristics and symbols. To the golden elves, the sun and light. To the moon elves, the moon and night. Forest, all trees and all animals, seawater and fish. Gray, earth and life, and black, darkness and spiders. At that moment, it seemed to her that everyone would be equal and would love each other. She hoped that they would be able to overcome hatred and live in peace. The dark-haired one became very angry and started screaming about how she should explain to the dark elves that they shouldn't be offended by the gold ones. After all, only by paying for the spilled blood could the elves live in peace. She asked the fair-haired one to join and get rid of the golden elves together. However, lowering her gaze, the first elf said that she could not. The dark and gold elves, all her children, she did not want anyone to disappear. Waving her arms, the dark goddess screamed that this was all nonsense. The heavenly Tao intervened in their dispute, asking them to stop. He asked what they wanted to achieve after they took revenge, to which the girl replied that it was so that the golden elves would feel despair. At that moment, a sinister smile appeared on Dao's face, and it was with this smile on his face that he assumed that they wanted to rule themselves as well. However, the dark goddess immediately shouted that she was not like the golden ones, because she only wanted peace for the dark elves. With the same gloomy face, Dao then asked her not to do the same as the gold elves, because if they did the same, nothing would change. He loudly declared that if she was interested in the question of morality, then she did not need to follow the same path. A look of surprise appeared on the girl's face because she hadn't even thought about it. And then, the more she thought, the more her hand began to shake. She couldn't believe that the gold elves would go unpunished. To which the black-haired guy clarified that any actions would have to be paid for, but their price was not to enslave the gold elves. At that moment, the black-haired girl exhaled heavily. Having agreed with the proposal from the heavenly Tao, she surprised him. She understood everything, saying that it was necessary to create favorable living conditions for the dark elves. Both of our heroes smiled, because they were glad to hear these words. Turning to the main character, the mother goddess asked him to forgive her for the fact that the guy had to interfere in their family squabbles. To which Dao stated that her family was only elves, and his were all three worlds. His goal was to find ways to reconcile the three worlds. After letting the goddess's mother think, Dao asked if she had figured out how to solve the problem, to which she immediately received a positive answer. She needs to go and talk to the current elf lord, and if he doesn't talk, she will use force. And so, the main character once again uttered his proverb, "Force will not solve the problem, but it will help deal with the enemy." At that very moment, the mother goddess said that if the conversation failed, then the golden elves and the new ruler were all her enemies. The protagonist was going to go with her and see where it all led. Seeing that Qingtian had fallen asleep, he slapped her on the forehead, telling her that it was time for them to go. The protagonist's companion did not understand where they were going, to which the black-haired man loudly declared that they were going to the Elven Palace. After some time, the largest building, the Kayal Palace, a bowl broke inside and a loud cry was heard that it was waste. Then one of the maids was slammed into the ground and told to add less sugar because she was on a diet. It was the princess who asked the trembling elf if she dared to disobey her. The princess turned to the side and asked with a terrifying look if she had prepared this. She, looking towards her mistress, could not contain her fear. Her whole body trembled. Falling to her knees, she immediately screamed at the princess, asking her to forgive her for her mistake. At that moment, the yellow-haired girl immediately walked up to her, kicked her in the face, and asked with a shout if she really thought an apology was enough. The elven mother watched this scene from the side, right from the sky, her whole body trembling. She didn't understand how the elven nobles could do such things to their own clan. Heavenly Dao asked the girl if she couldn't stand it, because he was already beginning to fear that she would explode with anger. She didn't understand what the main character meant and asked again, to which the guy pointed to the side. His finger pointed straight at the window, which was not far from the princess's chambers. Inside, a yellow-haired man in a suit was leading two girls who were chained together. He shouted to the two of them not to hesitate, but to go faster. It was the purple-haired elf and the human. Approaching the huge door, the old elf knocked several times, and then he opened the door, telling the lord that he had brought him new servants. The man sitting at the back of the room first smiled lewdly and then said that it was not bad. Sitting surrounded by beautiful girls, he said that everything had been done well today. Our heroes also watched this scene. The mother goddess silently watched what was happening. The black-haired guy asked the yellow-haired girl what she felt when she looked at them. A staff began to form in her hands, and with a trembling voice she said that if these were truly elven nobles. After a short pause, she finished her thought. She had no intention of engaging in any negotiations with them, as they were unnecessary here. Immediately, a huge magic circle formed right below her, and she began to call out to the sleeping tree of the world. At that very moment, a magic circle also appeared right above the tree. The mother goddess asked him to answer her call. There was total silence. The leaves stopped rustling and the birds stopped singing. And just a moment later, there was a huge roar, and the whole earth began to shake. Every forest dweller felt this pressure on themselves. Their bodies could not stand on the ground. The princess, who was in her chambers, could not understand what was happening, assuming that it was an earthquake. Ordinary elves fell to their knees and begged the god to stop. Not understanding why he was angry, they asked him to have mercy on them. At that very moment, the earthquake stopped. They did not understand what was happening. Suddenly, one of the yellow-haired elves began to run from the forest with a frightened face, shouting that they needed to run away. Everyone was scared because the tree people got out of control and started attacking the elves. The faces of the tree creatures were filled with malice, and malice emanated from them. However, even at this point, the mother goddess did not stop calling on her true powers. Still, she asked to answer her call, thereby waking up someone who shouldn't have. In the middle of the forest, a huge dark shadow with horns and huge wings rose up. It was the green dragon of the elven forest, Iraq, who heard a familiar voice. Looking towards the tree, he seemed to understand everything. While he was looking towards the tree, all the earth that was shackling him began to crumble down. Any living creature in the forest looked like an insect against his background, but they were not afraid of him. As soon as the green dragon came to his senses, he immediately screamed like a beast throughout the forest. The eyes of all the inhabitants of the forest were filled with anger. Their eyes were scarlet red. And the dragon did not stop screaming, his roar becoming louder and louder with every second. At this time, in the heavenly world, the palace of the elven god, the man sitting on the throne felt what was happening in the world of the elves. This man was the god of the elves of the third cycle, Randall. He did not understand why the tree was angry, assuming that it was because of the man's return. Having shouted loudly for everyone to stop, his servants did not understand what was happening. Suddenly, he immediately asked where his guards were, ordering them to appear to them. In an instant, 3 silhouettes appeared in front of him, appearing out of thin air. The 3 girls immediately fell on one knee, asking their master what had happened. The elf god Randall ordered them to see what happened to the world tree, ordering them, if they realize it is hostile, they need to get rid of it. The 3 girls immediately shouted in unison, "Yes," thus making it clear that they understood the order. The dark-haired elf looked into the distance, straight at the sky, until it began to swirl. She understood perfectly well what was happening right now. The man standing behind them asked Grace what instructions she would give them, to which the girl sighed heavily, telling him to prepare the dark elves. She understood perfectly well that the battle of the gods was about to begin. She expected something similar. At this time, in the elven palace, someone flew out of the window from the chambers of the current ruler of the elves, breaking the window. Naturally, the mother goddess noticed this, even though the man's speed was fast. He, gathering his strength, angrily asked who they were. Not having received an answer, he further asked why the world tree was angry. To which the girl replied to the man that he didn't need to know who she was, saying only that she wants the elven nobles to pay for the oppression of their own race. At that moment, the long-haired man's entire body began to tremble. And then he laughed loudly, looking towards the yellow-haired girl. She frowned and asked the man why he was laughing. He said with a sullen face that there was one thing she couldn't understand, even with the help of the dark elves and the tree of the world. The golden elves will never be defeated, because the god of the golden elves is the current ruler of the elves, one of the gods of the western heavens. However, the girl turned around and replied that in that case they had nothing to talk about. But the long-haired elf was not going to agree with this. He shouted that she didn't think about herself at all, asking rudely if she was sure she wanted to leave. At that very second, he raised his hand, loudly snapping his fingers. Immediately, the elves standing on the walls pulled the threads, preparing for an attack. Elven mages emerged from the forest and began to cast a spell. The mother goddess watched what was happening without moving at all. The protagonist standing nearby asked her to be careful, since everyone present here was above the 5th rank, and she sighed heavily in response. Having said that she just wanted harmony, she did not understand why the elves did not listen to her, to which the guy replied that he was not worth asking. After all, he had also asked himself the question earlier. The laughter of the long-haired ruler distracted them from their conversation, who asked if these were their last words. And then, with a disgusting face, he shouted that if this was so, then it was time for them to die. Immediately, the old man standing on the wall shouted for everyone to get ready for the attack. The mother goddess, with a gloomy face, said gloomily that she felt sorry for them. Tears appeared on her face. She asked not to blame her since they chose this path. Immediately, there was a powerful explosion on the wall, scattering the archers in different directions. Loud screams arose. They could not believe their own eyes. After all, a huge tree man climbed right onto the wall towards them. Immediately, one of the elves shouted that the tree people were besieging their city, and panic arose. They didn't understand what was happening, because they were their allies. Everyone began to prepare for defense. However, it was already too late. The wooden one prepared to attack, swinging. And then he dealt a powerful blow. At that very moment, a huge shield rose up. The elves standing at the gate exhaled heavily, starting to smile and talk among themselves about how the wall held up. However, at that very moment, right behind the wooden man, the green dragon also prepared for battle, gathering energy. A huge accumulation of energy began to form right in his mouth, which he fired straight towards the shield where the elven guard stood. There was a powerful explosion. The wall was destroyed along with the wall, and loud screams began to be heard. Each of the elves understood that it was all over, because even the green dragon appeared. Their faces were in horror. The tree people began to advance as soon as the wall collapsed. They began to grab the elves who had survived, and helpless cries began to resound, it seemed, throughout the entire forest. Although it was difficult for the mother goddess to give this order, she ordered that everyone be destroyed. That is why wooden people killed their opponents, sparing absolutely no one. The old man in command of the ground infantry shouted at his subordinates not to panic and ordered them to reorganize their formation. He also gave the order for the infantry to take the attack on themselves and for the magicians to attack from the rear. A long-haired man watched this carnage from the air without moving at all. With anger on his face, he said that even tree people with a dragon are here. After thinking for a moment, the anger on his face disappeared and he exhaled heavily with contempt. This time, with a smile on his face, he said that he didn't know what the girl had done, but in the end, victory would still be theirs. Naturally, the mother goddess did not understand these words and asked the man again what he meant, to which he, with a disgusting face, pointed upwards, straight into the sky, asking the girl to look. She raised her head and saw how a whirlwind gradually began to form in the sky. Literally, after the girl looked, a bright yellow light appeared from this whirlwind. Seeing it in the sky, the yellow-haired girl recognized it and screamed and asked what was there. A bright yellow feather fell from the sky, right in the center of this beam, and after him, 3 female silhouettes appeared with outstretched wings. The gray-haired girl shouted that the master's guard had arrived. Her name was Catherine. She had arrived on the master's orders to destroy them. The protagonist, counting them, counted 4 members of the guard. The heavenly Tao guessed that this elf lord was planning to destroy the world tree. The yellow-haired girl immediately intervened in his thoughts, saying that she would not allow this. Tao said that if she does not suppress her power, she will go to the human world. This will cause trouble as soon as Tao said this. Immediately, lightning struck straight from the sky and hit the gray-haired girl. Naturally, she noticed the approaching danger, so she immediately glanced to the side. At the same time, she raised her sword, aiming it to attack. With a light swing, she cut through the lightning that was approaching her. Her body was covered in energy for only a moment, but it was enough for her to defend herself from the powerful attack. Looking at this, a smile appeared on Dao's face. He found it interesting, because the aggression of the sky was not enough. He ordered the system to show the rules of heavenly punishment to the human world. As soon as the system revealed the rules, the Tao shouted that if you reflect or violate the heavenly law, their sorrow will not end, but only a new punishment will come. The second punishment will begin after some time, and the power will begin to increase. Until the target is hit, that was the rule. After reading this, the black-haired hero breathed a sigh of relief. Having told the girl standing next to her that he had just revised the law and that a new punishment was coming very soon, the mother goddess thought that Tao would simply kill her. But he folded his arms and looked at the sky, saying that it would be difficult to have fun, but one could enjoy the view. And at that very moment, new energy began to gather in the sky. Lightning struck in different directions. Looking at the sky, the gray-haired girl did not understand what was happening. Gritting her teeth, she was angry, not understanding why a new storm had appeared, since it had destroyed the previous one, and also understanding that this blow would be more powerful. Looking towards R2, she understood that she had to hurry. Immediately, a terrifying voice was heard calling out to that very same Catherine. The dragon flew in and sat on the wall, asking if she really wanted to become an enemy of the world tree. And at that very moment, the green dragon's face changed. He was angry. She, looking towards the green dragon, apologized, saying that this was her master's order. To which the dragon shouted at her to take a good look at this Randall, asking if she really thought he had the right to consider himself the ruler. She, raising her sword, said coldly, asking the great dragon not to insult her master, ordering her comrades to guard the overlord's domain while she dealt with the world tree. The dragon, hearing this, considered the girl too arrogant, asking if she really thought that he could not defeat her. To which Catherine said even louder that even at the height of his power, she would have nothing to fear. In an instant, darkness fell over the entire area and green energy began to fill the air. The green dragon shouted in an angry voice that they would check it right now. The mother goddess appeared between them and asked them to wait for them. She asked them to give her time so that she could sort things out on her own. The dragon, naturally, was surprised to hear such words from the blonde. He thought he was imagining things, but the girl didn't die after all. She refuted the green one's words, saying that she had died, which surprised him. With a serious expression, she said that even in death she could not calmly watch how the elves behaved. A magic circle immediately appeared beneath her, and she again turned to the world tree, to her old friend, asking him to lend her strength. The magical tree immediately responded to the girl's call, beginning to release bright yellow energy. A huge amount of energy accumulated directly above the tree, and 6 circles appeared inside this energy. Watching this, Jingtian noticed that 6 large fruits had appeared on the tree. Heavenly Tao looked at his subordinate's reaction and then looked into the distance. Trembling and straining, He could not understand where this fruit was, realizing that right now in front of him there were clearly 6 hidden worlds. He was angry because one elf lord had 6 worlds at once. He did not understand how many resources those who would oppose him would have to collect. The system immediately asked whether it should be destroyed, because if the 6 worlds began to develop, there was a possibility that they would eventually absorb the resources of 3 worlds. To which the main character asked the system not to worry, because everything was well hidden, so they did not need to worry. All this energy that came from the tree was directed towards the yellow-haired girl. She began to press into her tiny body, and she, in turn, began to make exciting sounds. And then, literally a second later, the absorption was complete. A new garment began to appear on the girl's body, which was formed due to the new power. This time, the mother goddess was confident in her power. She loudly declared that they would solve everything right now.